Hello, hello, hello. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is 240, Q and A number 240. Yay. Um, I want to remind everybody that the reason we have this Q and A, not the only reason, but the primary reason, is to answer questions about my method. So I am where my authority lies most is on my books, right? So if you've been using my books or my compositions, by the way, the compositions are part of my method. Um, a lot of people don't know that. They think I just write, to satisfy that itch. And there's some truth to that, but I try to write within the boundaries of different skill levels. That's why I've got so many pieces for the beginners, so many pieces for the second beginners. It's like my method has two beginner levels, sort of like the hobbits that have second breakfast, right? Good. Hello, Larry. Hello, David. Nice to see you guys. Larry says, "Happy Trumpet Friday." Woohoo! Yeah. So I don't mind questions. Hello, Sunstorm. Um, I don't mind questions outside of my method, of course. That's mostly what we talk about is trumpet stuff, right? But the main reason I'm here is to answer questions about the the method that you know has evolved over the past 40, 50 years. I shouldn't say 50. I started teaching when I was 15. That sounds weird saying it that way. I started teaching when I was 15 years old. Wow. I've been I've been teaching trumpet. Um it's like I can't imagine a life without that. Now, I have told you guys about when I took 7 years off, but I never stopped teaching. When I talk about the 7 years off thing, I'm always talking about um, off from weekly lessons. So it's a weird thing. I've told you guys about this before. While I had that 7 years off, I had um, people who would travel to Houston and take 4 hour lessons and then go back home. This is long before the internet. Well, not before the internet, long before internet lessons. Um, yeah, and people would come out. Uh, now, I have to admit they didn't come to take lessons with me. They came for other reasons, but then while they were in town, took lessons. So Mr. Lampy says, question on endurance. I have a hard time getting through two choruses. I can recover, but I get ragged toward the end. Airflow issue. That could be, but I think what happens a lot of times is there's two things I would look at. One is how loud are you playing? Um, if it's not loud and you're still having that kind of issue. Now, so why would I say loud? Because if you're improvising with the track, you might be, especially if you've got headphones on. If you've got headphones on, you might be playing louder than you think you are. And don't get me wrong, that's not a bad thing. Okay, but if you've got headphones on and you're playing with the track, so you've got Um, it's hard to hear yourself, and then the volume in the track can be pretty high, and it can force you to play louder than what you practice in the, the routine, and that can make you tired. The good news is we want that. We want to get tired from playing louder. That way, your endurance will grow from that. Now, if it's been the same endurance all this time, then that's something to look at. Now, the other thing is if you're playing with tracks, being out of tune. Now, I'm not saying your notes are out of tune, but if your horn is out of tune and you're playing with the track, it can be like trying to do a marathon with ball and chain, because the extra work you have to go through to get it to sound good is a bit of a drag on your chops. So, and I've seen this in the lessons. I've actually seen here in the studio where the students would say, "Oh, I don't know what's going on," and I can hear it. I heard it from the beginning, and they have cracked notes and bad endurance, and it's all we had to do was to fix it was to um, tune their horn up, not tune. So that's the thing, right? The reason you're getting tired. I'm not saying you, Mr. Lampy, but I'm saying this happens, right? Um, what makes you tired if your horn is not in tune is that you're playing in tune, regardless of how out of tune the horn is. So if we didn't care and if we were just pushing buttons down and blowing, we would play out of tune and it wouldn't be an issue. But we hear that it's off and we bend to put it in place. And that's hard work. So now it could be air flow. Oh, and then the other thing is that we have a tendency to try to fill every measure. And especially if you're filling every measure with long notes, that can also be a burden. So if we're playing, improvising, we want to have sort of a balance between playing and not playing. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm going to say it just like I said about the volume. We kind of want that. We kind of want that fatigue. And you can have times when you feel every measure with notes, okay, for the sake of improving your fatigue, improving your endurance. So, but yes, I'm sure there's other things as well. But now let me ask you this: Is it just as rough endurance-wise if you're not doing uh, the improv? Is it just as rough? Then that might shed a little light. So, like when you're doing the routine, or uh, when you're playing without the tracks, is the endurance a little higher? Those are the kind of questions that can help you pinpoint what's wrong. Larry says, "Can you speak about tonguing? I hear, read, to, do, ta, da, and even the, though. And I say yes to all the above." That's I got two huge things out of my lesson with um, uh, Charlie Geyer. I'm so sad that he passed away. Um, I should have connected with him. So, so I learned two great things from him. One we just talked about now, kind of, sort of. The trumpet is a naturally out of tune instrument, and we have to work to put it in tune. Um, but the other thing was that, so every teacher I had up until I took that lesson with him, I'm not saying they all believe, that's one of the things as I get older, as an INTP, as I get older, I start to understand what people really meant. And that lots of the things people say is not really what they meant. It's the way people talk is like a minefield for me sometimes, especially when I was younger. So, from my perspective, the way all my teachers used to talk, it used to be all, this is the right way to tongue, all the other ways are wrong. And that's how I approached it because that's how I was taught. The truth is, I don't think most of those guys even knew what they were doing, right? So, in terms of what I mean is, that sounds so offensive. I don't think they knew what was going on inside their mouth. I had the one teacher told me that your tongue is dumb, and what he said that in the context of what we're talking about. Your tongue is dumb. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know what your tongue is doing inside your mouth. That's what he meant by that. And so what what oh, I forgot his name again. Charlie Geyer taught me in that 2-hour lesson. What he taught me was that there is no right tongue. There's and what I teach my students now is not right or wrong, what's appropriate and inappropriate. And there's times, many times when I've talked to the students and said to them, that way that you're tonguing right now, don't forget how to do that, but we're not going to do that on this song. See what I'm saying? I tell them straight out, don't forget how to do what you're doing right now because you're going to need that later, but not on this song. So sometimes, oh, and by the way, the very last lesson I ever took was with Armando Gatala, and Armando Gatala is the one that told me about the TH um, articulation. And so, to me, each one of those is a different tool in your toolbox or your tool. My one teacher used to talk about the tool belt, right? Yeah. So, um, each one of those ways of playing, of articulating, is a different tool in your tool belt. And I'll tell you what, after that lesson with Charlie Geyer, my salsa career, okay, so you guys might have heard me say this in the context with last, with my lessons with Dick Schaefer. The thing is Dick Schaefer got me that lesson with Charlie Geyer. So if I'm saying after one or after the other, it's the same thing. I was taking lessons, and as soon as I had that lesson with Charlie Geyer, everything that Dick Schaefer was trying to say to me made sense. The only difference, I think, between the two of them was just the way that they said it. And I'm not saying that Dick Schaefer said it wrong. I'm just saying that I didn't understand this. Like I said, the way people talk is oftentimes a landmine for me to try to avoid. People say stuff all the time that means entirely something different to me. I told you guys, I think, long ago about this guy I complimented on my website, and then within an hour, he calls me up and threatens me to kill me. He says he's gonna kill me next time he sees me. It was a compliment. So yes, I'm an INTP. There's a lot of disconnect between me and the way other people think. A lot of disconnect. I'm better now at navigating. But anyway, the point is there is no right articulation, there is no wrong articulation. The more different ways that you can tongue, the better. In that lesson with Charlie Geyer, he made me play a note and move the tongue starting here and move it farther and farther in the back of my mouth so that I could hear the difference. So Mr. Lampy says, no, it only happens with tracks. See, that's what I thought. No endurance problem on Chops Pro. And Chops Pro is hard. The first time I played the Chops Pro book myself, it chewed me up and spit me out. it took me like 2 weeks to get used to that book. It was the first one I wrote in that series. And yes, I could not play the whole book when I first wrote it. Within 2 weeks, I was fine. But if you're only having that problem, then one of those things that I was talking about, either the pitch is off and the pitch, I have to say it one more time, the pitch of your horn, not your intonation. This is not something you can fix with checking the tuner because you might be bending it up or down, and that's not going to help you figure out what the pitch of the horn itself is. Um, You know how I figure it out for myself in the middle of a gig? I don't typically use the tuner on a gig. I look at how my notes crack or how um, hard the notes are. If I'm cracking notes that are normally flat, then I'm probably playing my horn is probably uh, the slide is probably too far out. If I'm cracking notes that are typically sharp, then the slide is probably too far in. So that's actually a real thing that I look for. But like I said, it's not just that. There's other things that it could be. Um, like I said, if you are playing too loud, it can sap up all of your endurance. Hello, Karen. Karen says, hi, Eddie. Our director wants us to use a do tongue in one spot, which I think is kind of legato. That's correct. I agree with that. I would say that's a form of legato. Mr. Lampy says, my teacher, Charles Brady, said that the history of trumpet playing is a history of crack notes. uh-huh. Yeah, in this case, what I'm talking about is uh, paying attention to whether the notes crack up or whether they crack down. Now, here's the thing: maybe you don't have a problem with the intonation on the horn, and it could be one of the other things I mentioned. But I do think it has something to do with the tracks if it's not happening on the one on the not the one range, the Chops Pro book, because the Chops Pro book is uh you know I'm not going to tell you who it was and who it was. I had a student one time that had a lesson with a famous high note trumpet player with lots and lots of chops. And this is back when that book was brand new. The Chops Pro book was brand new. And this famous guy looked at the book, flipped through it and says, do you play this in one session? He's like, that's too much. You can't do that. You know, it's funny, right? So that was part of my philosophy with those books, all of them, even going back to the daily routines book. Part of the philosophy is that this is harder than anything you'll ever have to do on stage. Um, Karen says, which notes are typically sharp that you would use the first slide for? Um, Only one comes to mind, the F natural at the top line. That's sharp. Um, yeah, I think that's the only one I can think of. The D beneath that is flat. Um, oh, you think so? First valve. Oh, first valve. Oh, I misread that. I'm sorry. I apologize. The first valve slide. Which notes are typically sharp that you would use the first valve slide for? You know, my first answer to that is the C sharp. Now there are a lot of people that use the first slide for A. I don't I don't do that. I do. So here's the thing. When you're playing, you should be constantly listening to the pitch. So are there times on the A or the E that I might use the first slide to lower it? Yes, there are times. It's not very often, but I do take that into account. If it sounds sharp to me, I'll pull that slide and bring it down. But I don't think any intonation should ever be one formula that fits for every song. It should never be like that. Never. You should tune while you're playing. It's part of you guys have heard me say before that if you can't read, maybe I haven't said this here, but I've said it on some of the videos. If you can't read double sharps and double flats just as fluently as you read everything else, then you never finished learning how to read music. I know that's kind of harsh, but if you can't read double sharps, double flats, B sharps, C flats, F sharps, and I'm sorry, F flats and E sharps, if you can't read those, you never finished learning how to play the trumpet or learning how to read music. And I feel the same way about um, learning to play trumpet. You haven't finished learning how to play the trumpet if you don't tune while you play. It's the same sort of thing. So, so I'll tell you, my first answer to you, even though it was wrong, um, I uh, have in the past, um, because I was cracking on what is that one? Tchaikovsky, I think. And I think it's on C trumpet that we play first valve. Right? We have that like little triplet figure on Tchaikovsky. And I was cracking it all over the place. Worse than that. And I figured out if I pull the slide out. Now, do I do that every time I have an F? No. Right? So that's what I'm saying. And you know, Karen says, I wish my ear were a bit better for tuning. Think I'm lacking there. Any tips? So my first tip when it comes to the intonation is practice the tonalization studies. and I know you already are, but I really think that one of the most important benefits of the tonalization studies is that you're going to play better in tune. I really believe that. Now, you should. So, like, so your question was which notes are typically sharp that you would use the first valve slide for? And normally, and this is why I took a tangent here, because normally I would use the first slide and the third slide to play C sharp, low C sharp below the staff. Normally I would do that, except every note, think of it this way, every note that you play is a moving target when it comes to pitch. Every single note, you have to tune every note. So it's not good enough to say C sharp needs both slides. It's not good enough to do that. A lot of times that C sharp is going to be flat because you've used both slides. We don't play an equal temperament. And even if we did, I don't believe that the pitch stays in one place. I think it moves while we're playing. The only exception to that is when we're playing with electrical instruments like a keyboard. The keyboard doesn't change ever. But when we're playing in bands and with guitar players, so think about it. The and string players, why do they tune in an orchestra on the break? Why do they do that? Because it took that long to get back out of tune again. That's why they do that. So the pitch is never steady. So the outside forces change. The what happens, and I've told you guys this story before about how I was telling my brothers how I didn't understand how anybody could miss a free throw. It's the same court, the same ball, same net, same everything, right? How could somebody miss that? And my brothers gave me my one brother, he said something that is so wise, and I think applies to so many things. He says it's not the court, the ball, it's not those external things that change throughout the game. It's you that changes. You're not the same person at the beginning of the game as you are at the end of the game. So there are things that influence the same way. There are things that influence our intonation as we go. So you can't. It's not safe to say, "Oh, here's that position. I'm going to that position." There's a famous story. I won't say who it is because he's passed away, and even when he was still alive, I respect him. I played with him, I guess, about 5 times in my career. But he was a famous jazz, let's just say jazz musician. He wasn't a trumpet player, but let's just stick with that because I don't want you to figure it out who it was. But this guy, after having a very successful career as a I almost said, as a jazz player, he went and moved to LA so that he could do, the film scores and all that stuff, recording sessions. And the story I was told was that they kept complaining that he was out of tune. You're out of tune. You're out of tune. You're out of tune. And finally, the producer had to go in there, pull him out, and say, "Hey, man, you're out of tune." And he says, "No, they're out of tune." And obviously, it doesn't work like that. Even if they are out of tune, you're supposed to adjust to them. So, and all of this is trying to explain, right? As far as intonation goes, all of this is to explain that it's always a moving target. It's never set it and forget it. Intonation is always a moving target at all times. This is, by the way, this is one of the reasons I've gotten to where I loathe loud gigs, because on the loud gigs I cannot hear the pitch. I can't play in tune. I can't adjust because I all I hear is that's all I hear. That's This is the biggest reason I don't go to jam sessions anymore. I get in there and they're playing the tune. I can hear that what I'm playing isn't fitting. I plug my ear up and I try to move over to the side and play the head so I can see what key am I in. But even plugging my ear, I can't hear. And a lot of times I'll ask afterwards, what key was that in? And I would have played a whole half step off through my whole solo. Makes you wonder what's going on in people's heads when they clap for that. Maybe they're having the same problem as I am. And at what point do you say that's no longer jazz? I'm sorry. At what point do you say this is not right? This is not how jazz music works. It shouldn't be that loud. But that's how, just about. There was one jam session I was still going to up north. I had to drive an hour and a half to get to it. But then that one closed down. So I did get an invitation. The guy said, it's not a jam session, but I'm welcome to come play. Um, I'm a little weird about that right now. Anyway, Larry says, is the NTW New Trumpet Week? Oh, it is NTW. New Trumpet Week for me. Oh, I get it. You're saying you got a new trumpet. Well, congratulations. Congratulations, the Martin Committee. That's fantastic. Congratulations. Karen says, I can hear myself well with the tonalization studies, but it is harder in the band. That's right. I played in the key of A until I stopped hitting the D sharp. There you go. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. All right. Good questions today. Any other questions? Yeah, when we're playing with a band, we've talked about this before, but when you're playing with a concert band or even a jazz band, depending on how loud everybody's playing, that can sap your endurance. I told you guys 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, how I had a gig and the crowd noise was one of those um, rooms that had glass on three different sides. So everything that all the yakety yak that people were doing was amplified, and I it was my first. I've been having gigs all this time, so it wasn't because I don't have chops, but it was my first time having an endurance issue, and I don't know, 30 years. So I don't think I've lost my chops, except maybe I've lost some. I played loud in other gigs, but maybe not that loud. You guys know how it is, right? If the ambient noise around you is really, really loud, you will play louder. That's the way it works. and that could be crowd noise, it could be the people in the band. Um, when the volume around you is louder, you will play louder, and that's going to affect your endurance. All right. Talking about the tongue, do you agree that the tongue plays a role in upper range playing? Yes, I do. Does that get introduced later in levels above where I am? No, we don't talk about it. Um, Here's what I believe. I believe that how you play is how you play. Does it involve some tongue work? That really depends on you and your. So let me tell you this: the tongue is only one of the different forms of resistance that give you the higher range. It's only one. So it's possible to play without higher tongue. It's possible to play higher without a higher tongue in your mouth. Okay. That said, for me personally, when I'm playing Super C, I like to say it this way. Well, let's say first that when I'm playing low F sharp, my mouth is like this. The oral cavity is about the size of a uh, golf ball. I could put a golf ball very easily in my mouth. Not play that way, but that's how I would measure how open my mouth is. When I play Super C, the tongue is so high up in my mouth, the the oral cavity is so small that my pinky finger wouldn't go in there. It's smaller than my pinky finger. Okay, so yes, I do think that um, that the tongue plays a role in upper range playing, but we won't talk about it because you have to find your um, most natural combination of things like that. Even if we did talk about it, what would you do? You know, I've had people say, "Oh, well, I push my tongue up and it doesn't change anything." That's right. And in fact, the way I like to think about the tongue coming up is, the higher I play, the more I can feel the airstream through there. And I'm going to push my tongue up only until I start to feel the air go over my tongue. No farther. Only up as high as I feel the air. So, how do I know how high to put my tongue for the Super C? Because I can feel that. I can feel that air going over the tongue like that. Okay? But no, we don't do any exercises to try to make that happen. I believe that should happen naturally. I really do. When you start tinkering with it, then there's problems. Now, there are things we can do to help that along. Now, and also, okay, so there is one exception, by the way. There is one exception to the tongue arch thing. I say we don't mess with it, we don't try to do this, or we don't try to do that. The exception is if you've been taught all your life to always have your tongue all the way down in your mouth, and you do that religiously, then we got to do something to get that up. Then we have to do something. But it's always as a last resort. And why would I say this? Why do I have such a no hands-on approach to stuff like that? for the same reason as I was talking about with the pitch. It's a moving target. Where your tongue is on one song for that same note is going to be different for the same note on a different song. It's a moving target. There is no formula that will fix it. You have to get better at adjusting while you go. And the talking about the pitch, talking about intonation, and talking about range, it's the same subject. It's the same subject. It just gets harder as you go higher. And we've talked about that before. It just gets harder while you go higher. Mr. Lampy says, I have trouble using the third valve slide. I grew up with an old recording which has a trigger valve. Pushing the slide out is misery for me. Any suggestions? Um, you can, yeah, I don't know. Off the top of my head, I'm not thinking of anything. Um, yeah, I can understand if you did it one way for that long and then only now switched. That can be rough. Um, Now you said first or third valve. So you know what I would do if it was me, because I've had stuff like this that was very hard, and you can practice that off of the horn, right? You can you can practice that off the horn, or maybe not playing, right? So you can have um like um you know just doing this. I had some I can't remember what it was. There was something like that I was trying to change, and I was on tour in Europe, and I was practicing everywhere we went, but up here with my fingers. I probably looked like I was autistic or something, right? But I was practicing. I was practicing while I was, you know, we. I remember very specifically standing in front of a cuckoo, one of those stores that sell cuckoo clocks. And I had forgot what I was doing, and I was just standing there practicing, and people were walking by, uh, looking at me like I was weird. And I was weird, so there's that. Karen says, our concert band played at an Irish fest last Saturday. There was another band playing nearby that was louder than we were. Crazy atmosphere. Yeah, the it's different for each band. You know what bugs me about this loud stuff is that there are people who are actually proud of it. That's what gets me. Actually, when I say it gets me, I mean it almost to the point that it breaks my heart to see that. And I've got a video coming out where I talk about volume a little bit, not in the context that we are right now, but in a different context. Actually, if you want to look for it, it's called something like I haven't edited it yet, so I don't know the exact, but talking about hard swinging lead players, hard swinging lead players. Look for a video like that coming out in the next few weeks or something. Um, and I talk about what's wrong with playing so loud. And it's not just what we've been talking about here. There's more to it than just that. Um, anyway, Mr. Derek says thank you. You're welcome. Larry says, David, a salesperson would buy a new trumpet. Karen says, one of my slide rings is adjustable. That makes a difference in comfort. Yeah, there's that. I can't use those rings. I don't remember why, but I remember having trouble with them. All right, good session. Any other questions? Yeah, you guys had good questions today. Larry says, when will your Pioneer book be published? Will it be beneficial to get it if we have the title book? So let me tell you guys why the Pioneer book is taking so long. Now, all I'm waiting on right now is the cover. And so I have it up there. I think it's number 3 on the list right now. Um, but let me tell you why it's taken so long. It's not much different from Chops Express. It's not much different from um, the daily routine, first study in the daily routines. It's just not that different. And I've got a problem with it because there's so few pages. I kind of feel like it's a waste to publish a book that had only like 30 pages in it. And I've thought about boosting the pages up somehow. One of the options I've thought about is including Chops Express, including the daily routine, the equivalent, right? Like having 3 routines in the same book. I've considered that. Um, but yes, it's been hard to justify putting that book out because it's not going to be that much different from the Chops Express. Just a tiny bit harder than Chops Express. And I've been using it. And if you want a copy, Larry, I can send you a copy of the rough draft. Um, just email me and remind me that you'd like a copy. Um, I am here's another option. Instead of trying to beef it up to more pages, I could sell it only as a ebook. That I don't have a problem with. I could do that. Now, to answer your question, is there a benefit to it? Yes, there's benefit. If you're doing the tyro, then the way it's supposed to work is that the higher you go up in the system, the more you're doing all of the routines, just not on the same day, obviously. And we talk about that in the one range book, right? What to do on what day, stuff like that. And I have a poster, by the way. Basically, what this is a schedule for different skill levels, right? So here's your days of the week, and here's your skill levels. So if you are a player level, let's say you're at the player level, you do the tyro. I can't do that upside down. Um, tyro player pioneer, tyro player pioneer, and then you take a day off, right? Now the first one for which you don't have pioneer is virtuoso. So all the other ones you would still need that book. And so sounds like a con job, doesn't it? It's like, here, buy this book too, and that book too. But it's all part of a system. That's why it's like that. So it's I'm not trying to con anybody. Okay. Mr. Lampy says, when should we move to a higher level routine? I play the pro routine pretty well, but not perfect. When should I try the master? Um, well, before I answer that question, let me suggest that before you move on, you should change, and I kind of spell this out a little bit in the one range book. Change the one day, just the one day. Still keep the hypothet. I call it the hypothetic Tuesday. Change your hypothetic Tuesday to Chops Express first. So you would change the now. What I'm talking about now is what to do when you decide it's time to move on. Change uh, to the Chops Express on that day, but up to the master level. And then um, when that's easy, what do I mean by easy? You know, you get an okay sound, you're not cracking a lot of notes, you have the endurance to get all the way through it. Then you can move up one level. So, like if I'm looking at the pro and the master on here, notice that on Tuesday it's the master routine, on Wednesday it's the pro routine. Oh, I'm sorry, I did that wrong. Pro and pro. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. Ha! Okay, why did I do that? Anyway, so yes, I guess this one is an exception. But yes, go to the Chops Express first before you move in completely. Okay? Now, how do you know when? There's one thing that I look for mostly. Let's say you're playing the tonalization studies, and it could be also a piece of music. It could be your improv. And without you knowing it, you overshoot the high C. And it's like it has a beautiful sound. It's got, you see what I'm saying? You overshoot, but it felt easy. Now it's not always like that because remember what we're doing, is largely psychological, mental. So it's I'm not saying that this happens every single time, but the more often you have these like overshoots, the more often you have these overshoots and it sounds great, that's a big hint right there. That's a big hint that you're ready to move to the next level. That's not the only thing we look for. We also look for fatigue. You said you don't get fatigued. That's another thing we're looking for. If you're not getting tired, then it's time to move on. Um, Another thing we're looking for is tone quality. If your tone quality is the same at the end of the session, this is a endurance issue. The better your endurance is, the the better your tone quality is. But if you've got great endurance up to high C, then you probably have terrible endurance up to E, and that's your foot in the door. I hope that makes sense. But yes, those are the kinds of things I'm looking for. You know what the weird thing about it is? I've had students that were overly eager and went to the next level too soon. I've had students that were afraid and went to the next level too late. And either one of those is not so good. And I know I'm not giving you a better way to look at it. Um, I do believe in being fearless. The ones that waited, they waited because they were afraid. So if you can make sure that there's none of that, um, now why would someone be afraid? They're afraid because they've heard either they've had experience themselves with screwing up their chops, or they've heard stories about people who screwed up their chops, stuff like that. Um, so there's people that wait and wait and wait, and they never get those signs that I'm talking about, that it's time to move on. And let me tell you this also. When you do move on, don't go back. Never backslide into what you were doing before. It's okay to rest. It's okay when you're doing this. When you first move up to the master level, it's okay to say, hey, do you know what? I overdid it yesterday. I'm going to take an extra day off this week. That's okay. That's okay. It's okay to rest. Don't go back. Don't go back. Too many people say, "Oh, I think I moved on too soon," and then they try to go back. That's not how this works. If you do that, you're, this is what I've been talking about with, and I tried to make a video. I might salvage it, about floundering, and I think floundering is terrible for your trumpet playing. When you finish something, first of all, don't say to yourself it's done until it is done. Be honest with yourself, okay? But if it is done and you move on, and it doesn't matter what we're talking about, it could be this, it could be learning a piece of music, whatever. There's so many of these steps that we take. Don't go if you're on step 4 and you're having a rough time, don't go back to step 3. This is what I was talking about in the one video. Haven't posted it yet. And there were things I didn't like about it, so it might not get posted. I have to maybe redo it. Um, but yes, don't go back. And the reason why I'm saying this is because we're always talking about how mental this stuff is. When it comes to chops, when you go back one step, what are you telling yourself mentally? Oh, you know, you did the previous steps, but they weren't good enough? What are you saying to yourself? That's not a good message. So there's two parts of what you do about this, right? Make sure it's the right time before you move to the next step. Make sure that whatever that step required, we could be talking about working backwards, right? We talk about 10 times on that one section. If it needs to be more than 10 times, then make it more than 10 times. And it's the same thing with here. If you have to, um, if you if you're just not 100% certain that it's time to move on, don't move on. Keep working at where you're at. Don't flounder. Don't go back to a step you already did. Okay? Because I think the mental consequences of that are severe. I think the mental consequences of saying to yourself, I tried really hard, but I still couldn't get it. Saying that to yourself is a terrible thing for your trumpet playing. Terrible outside of trumpet playing too, but you guys know I don't cross that line. Okay? Karen says, "Is it possible to send us the pretty poster of your routine?" I'll look for it somewhere. It's got to be a it's got to be on my hard drive somewhere. Either that or Pearl's. This is her work, by the way. Pearl did that poster. We were going to sell it um at what is it called? Cafe Press. And it never made it up to Cafe Press. I think maybe we did the poster and then found out that Cafe Press isn't doing those kind of posters anymore. I don't know, but there was a reason why we never put it up. Um, but yes, uh, Karen, do me a favor and send me an email to remind me, and I'll look for it, and we'll send you a copy. Mr. Lampy says it is not a range issue for me. I can go to the IE pretty well. Then you know what? I would pretty much say make the switch. So do what I said with the Chops Express first. If you don't have the Chops Express book, let me know and I'll make sure you get one. Um, and uh, so you would do that on your proverbial Tuesday. And if that goes well, then you can just switch to the other routine. Karen says, "What if you have so little left after the routine you can't practice much music?" Um, you can do tomorrow. Remember that this stuff all here is mostly conceptual. This is not. I've had. There's a nationality that's known for um, sticking to the rules, right? And I had people from that nationality, no, more than one, say, because this one is not the same chart as what's in the one range, and they said, why is this not the same? What are you trying to pull on us? And none of this. It's all supposed to be hypothetical. Once again, we use this terminology a few times in this Q and A, right? It's a moving target. Our practice time is a moving target. There's times when things have to be done differently. So it's okay to do the routine on one day and do the music on the next day. Now, we've talked about this before. If you do a only music day, then that quick warm up that I have, it's a free download on the website. I think it's called Quick Warm Up. Let me open it up and look real quick. That way you can just. I'll put a link on here. Let's see here. Quick warm up. Here's the link to the quick warm up. It takes like 5 minutes to do. And you should do that. Remember that on the other days, when you do the routine, that routine is not a warm up routine. That routine is a daily routine. In other words, it's a routine you do because the exercises in the routine make you a better player. It's not to warm you up. It takes you way past warming up. Right? It takes you way, way, way past warming up. We do the routine because it's good for us. It's like athletes doing push ups and pull ups and stuff like that. They don't do that stuff to warm up, at least not to my knowledge. Warm up is when you do the stretches and stuff like that, right? Um, when you do the actual hardcore exercises, that's to make you stronger. That's to have you tone. That's to focus your mind. All of that kind of stuff. It's the same thing for our daily routine. The purpose of the routine is to make you a better player. The warm up is to prevent damage. It's the same when we do a warm up, it's the same in sports as it is for us. We do the warm up to prevent damage. I remember seeing one time on YouTube this guy in Los Angeles sh- driving, weirdest video, really, um, driving through a park area where he saw these guys stretching. And he says, "You guys need to stop stretching. Stop stretching. You're slowing your times down." And I'm like, that's not why people don't stretch so that they can go faster. People stretch so they can run again tomorrow. Right? That's why you stretch so you don't get hurt on the run. And here's this guy, he's a some sort of sports medicine dude. Don't stretch, don't stretch. You're shortening, you're lowering your run times. You know, I've been injured running so many times, and if you're injured, you're not running, and then your health starts to pay for that. So yes, it's important to stretch. It's important to stretch so that you don't get injured, so that you can keep your health up. Mr. Derrick says, Mr. Lewis, what is a rough average time that most folks spend at each level in terms of months or years, assuming they are diligent with the routine schedule? It's there's no. Let me tell you this is however long it takes on the lower routine, you can expect it to take twice that much for the next routine. Okay, so it is a slow progress. I never, I never offered a quick fix in this regard. It's a long plan. Okay, I even say so um in the one range book. But yes, the higher you go. Now I used to think that it took longer as you went higher because of the strength, but I've discovered that the strength there you don't need more strength anything past high C. What you need for in the upper register is control, not strength. And what do I mean by control? Control of the subtle. As you go higher, everything you do physically to play becomes more nuanced and more subtle. That's why people struggle. Is because they think it's. I've shown you guys this before. Uh, Let me share screen after I open up my handy dandy. Um, Let me share screen. I know we're over time, but oh, my free trial has expired. Is it not going to let me do anything anymore? Let me see. Oh, it's what kind of free trial is that? I, I'm. If my free trial is over, why is it still letting me do this? Anyway, let's find the button to push. Share screen. Okay, so here's what most people think. Oh, what happened? All layers are empty. What's going on here? Oh, they're gonna let me have it open but not use it. Okay, that's better. Okay, here we go. Um, if we make a graph, and this is how much effort you have to play. I have to invest, right? This is effort. This is how high you're playing. E for effort, H for high. We think that it's a linear relationship. We think it's like that. It's not like that. It is not like that. The effort that you have to invest is more like this. And after a while, we can't recognize the difference. So let's say that this is from E above high C to super C. There's no difference. That's why I've told you guys this before. That's why I can still play super C even though I've been sick, even though, where does it say in stop sharing? Even though I've been sick, even though I went last year without practicing, even though all of this stuff. The only time I ever the only time I ever play Super C anymore is to show people that you don't need strength to do it. This is without a warm up, by the way. I am not warmed up. You guys know that I have dialysis and then I have lunch and then I do this, right? That was a Super C. How did I have a Super C if I needed strength to do it? I don't have that kind of strength. I haven't been practicing Super Cs. When I got sick last year in 2020, it started in 2023. Is that right? Anyway, I started range limiting because I haven't told you guys exactly what was wrong, um, but it was rough. I haven't told you guys the whole story because, as I've told you guys before, I don't cross that line. But I was sick enough to have to range limit. For a while, I was range limiting all the way down to G at the top of the staff. Not because I couldn't play the high notes, but because I didn't want to do anything to make my health worse than it already was. Sorry about this. It's doing it again. So, no, we don't need more strength to play higher. We need more control.